My dad did not say. "If you are busy this year, that is fine," he said. "Skip Christmas. You just make everything awkward," he thought, keeping his daughter, the one who worked out of a warehouse, away from the Nashville dining table would save the family face. He had no idea that just hours later, on the morning of December 25th, that elegant room would fall silent over a Forbes cover, and this time, the outcast would not be the one left humiliated. My name is Everly Hayes. On the night of December 11th, the winter cold had already settled heavily over the Mississippi River, bringing a brutal sheet of freezing rain that threatened to choke every major highway south of the Ohio Valley. I stood in the center of the operations floor at Pulse Route Systems in Memphis, staring up at a massive digital map of the American South. The glowing map was scattered with hundreds of pulsing red and amber dots. Each of those dots represented a heavy refrigerated truck carrying critical medical freight. Tonight, they were hauling dialysis fluids, insulin, surgical supplies, and blood plasma. I watched Interstate 40 turn a solid, angry crimson on the screen as the severe weather stalled commercial traffic for miles. The low hum of the servers and the urgent, hushed voices of my dispatch team filled the large room. Everyone was running on cheap black coffee and sheer willpower. My team was exhausted. I was utterly exhausted. But the freight absolutely had to move. If we failed to reroute those trucks through the secondary roads, rural clinics and regional hospitals would wake up to empty supply rooms, and patients would suffer. This was the complex world I had built from nothing. It was gritty, demanding, and entirely invisible to anyone outside the four walls of this converted warehouse. My personal phone vibrated violently against the cold metal surface of my desk. The screen lit up, and the caller ID flashed my father's name, Warren Hayes. He was calling from the family estate in Belle Meade, an exclusive, hyper-wealthy enclave in Nashville. I could almost perfectly picture him standing in his oak-paneled study, a crystal glass of expensive bourbon in his hand, a roaring stone fire keeping the winter chill completely at bay, in Belle Meade. Severe weather was only an inconvenience if it ruined the expensive landscaping or delayed a catered grocery delivery. For a brief moment, I considered letting it ring out to voicemail. We rarely spoke unless there was a mandatory family obligation on the calendar, knowing I could not avoid him forever. I picked up the phone and walked purposefully toward the glass-walled conference room in the far corner to block out the chaotic background noise of the dispatch center. I pulled the heavy glass door shut securely behind me. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice carefully level and professional. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if the massive winter storm was hitting Memphis hard, even though the state of emergency was all over the regional news networks. He got straight to the point, his voice carrying that familiar, impatient cadence of a man who was entirely used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Everly, I am calling about the Christmas brunch." I braced myself. In the Hayes family, major holidays were never about genuine connection, warmth, or shared memories. They were carefully curated networking events heavily disguised as family gatherings. Every invited guest was vetted for their net worth, social influence, and corporate utility. "What about it?" I asked, looking through the glass wall at my lead dispatcher, who was frantically typing on a glowing keyboard. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said, pausing just long enough for the silence on the line to feel heavy and deliberate. "We do not think it is a good idea for you to come this year." I stood perfectly still in the empty room. The glass wall of the conference room felt ice cold against my shoulder. The cruel words hung in the air, blunt and heavy. "Excuse me," I said, my tone completely flat. "We are hosting Mitchell Voss and his financial group," my father explained, launching into a rehearsed speech that sounded exactly as if he were reading directly from a corporate press release. "It is a crucial time for your brother. Grayson is closing the Cumberland Crown luxury real estate deal. The primary investors are coming to the brunch. The atmosphere needs to be completely polished. We need to project a certain image of success, stability, and high-level family unity to close this funding round. The words hit me directly in the chest, but I stubbornly refused to flinch. I had spent 7 long years building a vital logistics company from the ground up, fighting fiercely through supply chain crises, natural disasters, and countless nights sleeping on a concrete floor. I was certainly not going to break down over a revoked brunch invitation from a man who measured human worth strictly in zip codes and stock portfolios. "Are you cutting me out of Christmas?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. I wanted him to say it plainly. I wanted him to strip away the polite corporate jargon and fully own his cruelty. Warren let out a sharp, ragged sigh of irritation through the phone speaker. He always hated when I forced him to step out of his polite, sanitized phrasing and face reality. "Do not make me spell it out, Everly," he snapped, his temper suddenly flaring. "You make everything look cheap. You always show up in those plain clothes, looking like you just got off a dirty warehouse shift. You refuse to play the game. People will ask what you do. They always do. And I do not want to have to explain to a billionaire real estate investor that my 34-year-old daughter is managing truck drivers in a rundown Memphis neighborhood. It is embarrassing. You bring down the entire room." Before I could even formulate a proper response to that breathtaking insult, I heard the rustle of the phone physically changing hands. My mother, Celeste, came on the line. Her voice was light, airy, and entirely devoid of any genuine maternal warmth. "Darling, please do not make a big deal out of this," she cooed, her tone placating but incredibly firm. "This year is very important for Grayson. You know exactly how hard he has worked on this deal. Just let him have his moment in the spotlight without any distractions. We will send you a nice gift basket from that fancy bakery you used to like. All right, we can do a quiet dinner in late January when things settle down and the deal is officially signed." She was not defending me. She was just smoothing over the rough edges of my father's brutality, making sure the harsh rejection was delivered with a velvet glove so they would not have to feel guilty while drinking their holiday champagne. The anger rising inside me was not a fiery explosion. It was a quiet, cold, highly calculating thing. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice in protest. I did not remind them that my company was keeping regional hospitals from declaring states of emergency while they worried about the expensive upholstery of their dining chairs. Arguing with them was a complete waste of breath. They only understood power, leverage, and optics, and until now, they truly thought I possessed none of those things. "I understand," I said. My voice was so terrifyingly calm that it seemed to deeply unsettle them across the state lines. "You understand?" my father asked, abruptly taking the phone back. He sounded highly suspicious, perhaps expecting a loud tantrum or a desperate plea for inclusion. "Yes," I replied, my eyes fixed sharply on the red dots moving slowly across my dispatch screen. "I completely understand. Have a good Christmas. Dad." I hung up the phone, severing the connection before he could utter another single syllable. I walked out of the quiet conference room, the heavy glass door sealing shut behind me, and sat back down at my metal desk. The active dispatch floor was bathed in the harsh blue light of dozens of computer monitors. My heart beat steadily against my ribs, a rhythmic reminder that I was alive and exactly where I needed to be. I opened my laptop. There was a new email sitting at the very top of my inbox, flagged with high importance. The sender was Nora Bellamy from the Forbes editorial team. The subject line read, "Embargo Confirmation." I clicked the email open, my eyes rapidly scanning the text. The message was brief, professional, and entirely definitive. The holiday cover story was officially locked. The layout was finished, the photographs were chosen, and the copy was fully approved. The issue would go live on their digital platform and hit the physical newsstands simultaneously across the entire country. The release date and time were set in stone exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on December 25th. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, quiet time. The email was a silent, ticking time bomb waiting to detonate in the very middle of Belle Meade. I looked back up at the massive logistics map on the wall. Hundreds of trucks were fighting through the ice and the dark to deliver life-saving supplies, all coordinated by the complex system I had built with my bare hands. My family believed I was a failure simply because I did not wear tailored designer suits, attend the right charity galas, or boast about phantom millions at country club dinners. As I sat completely still in the room lit by the dispatch screens, the frantic energy of my team swirling around me, I realized a profound and painful truth. The insult was not that they were hiding me from their wealthy friends to secure a real estate deal. The true, agonizing pain was the stark realization that my own family had never actually wanted to know who I was. They had never once asked about my days, my struggles, my team, or my victories. They only cared if I was a suitable, decorative accessory for their perfect family picture. I was not. I would never be. But on the morning of December 25th, the entire world, including Mitchell Voss and my father, was going to find out exactly who they had uninvited from their polished table. 7 years ago, the Gulf Coast was swallowed by a Category 4 hurricane. I remember watching the news coverage from the pristine, climate-controlled living room of my Nashville apartment, the one my father had secured for me right after I finished my perfectly curated graduate program. The news anchors focused on the dramatic rescues, the flooded streets, and the torn roofs. But I was looking at something else. I saw the secondary disaster unfolding quietly in the background. The supply lines were completely severed. Rural clinics in the Panhandle and deep into Mississippi were running completely dry. They were out of insulin. They were out of broad-spectrum antibiotics. They were out of sterile saline. People were not just dying from the rising water. They were dying because a refrigerated truck was stuck behind a downed overpass, and nobody had a system to reroute it before the cargo spoiled. That was the exact moment I realized the polished, corporate path my father had meticulously mapped out for me was entirely hollow. He wanted me sitting in a glass boardroom, trading abstract derivatives or managing luxury real estate portfolios, completely insulated from the physical world. I wanted to fix the broken arteries of that physical world. So, I packed up my life, walked away from the pristine resume, and drove straight down to Memphis. Memphis was a logistics hub, a gritty, hard-working city built on moving heavy freight. It was there that I found Marisol Keene and Theo Mercer. Marisol had spent over a decade running procurement for a sprawling, perpetually underfunded county hospital system. She knew exactly what pure panic looked like when the blood bank was running low and the primary supplier went completely silent. Theo was a brilliant, highly neurotic transportation engineer who could visualize complex routing algorithms in his sleep but had absolutely zero patience for corporate bureaucracy. We did not start in a sleek tech incubator with ergonomic chairs and massive venture capital funding. We leased an abandoned electronics warehouse near the industrial rail yards. The roof leaked heavily during thunderstorms. The concrete floor was perpetually freezing, and the air always smelled faintly of ozone, diesel fuel, and old dust. It was not a sexy startup. We were not building an addictive social media app or a high-frequency trading algorithm. Our entire pitch was brutally unglamorous. We were building a predictive platform that could foresee critical shortages of medical supplies, blood, and medication during massive emergencies, and then automatically reroute trucks, drivers, and warehouse inventories in real time to completely bypass the disaster zones. When I finally tried to explain this vision to my family during a painfully stiff Thanksgiving dinner, the silence at the long dining table was suffocating. My father carefully set down his heavy silver fork, wiped his mouth slowly with a linen napkin, and offered a summary that dripped with profound disdain. "So, you are making software for trucks," he said. He did not ask about the predictive modeling. He did not care about the rural clinics running out of insulin. He only heard the word truck, and in his rigidly stratified world, that meant blue-collar labor. It meant dirty hands. It meant something a haze simply did not do. Later that same evening, he pulled me aside into his private study, pouring himself a generous measure of expensive scotch. He offered me what he genuinely considered a generous lifeline. He told me to drop this ridiculous hobby, move back home to Nashville, and take a proper job as a junior partner at his commercial real estate firm. He promised me a corner office, a six-figure starting salary, and introductions to the right social circles. He presented the offer strictly as a rescue mission. I politely, but firmly, declined. I told him I had absolutely zero interest in leasing high-end retail space. I did not want to survive on the Hayes name, trading lazily on inherited influence. I wanted to build something that actually mattered, even if I had to build it entirely in the dark. Those early years in the Memphis warehouse were absolutely brutal. The romanticized idea of being an entrepreneur is a dangerous lie. The reality was surviving on 3 hours of sleep, collapsed heavily on cheap nylon folding chairs that dug painfully into our spines. It was waking up in a cold sweat at 2 o'clock in the morning to personally call furious, exhausted freight drivers, begging them to take a dangerous detour down an unpaved county road to deliver dialysis filters to a flooded clinic before the morning medical shift started. It was Theo frantically patching our buggy routing software while downing endless cups of cheap, burnt coffee from a plastic machine that Marisol had bought at a local thrift store. It was the constant, gnawing fear that a single missed delivery or a crashed server could actually cost a human life. We had no safety net whatsoever. We survived strictly by scraping together tiny, desperately fought-for contracts with independent regional clinic networks that were just as broke as we were. Every single dollar we earned went straight back into purchasing more server space, upgrading satellite tracking, and paying our drivers a fair wage. There was absolutely nothing left over for personal luxuries, and frankly, I preferred it exactly that way. I needed to know that I could survive without the golden parachute my family had always dangled over my head. I made a very deliberate, conscious choice about how I lived my life. I traded in the least luxury sedan my father had co-signed for a reliable, heavily dented, 10-year-old pickup truck. I rented a tiny, drafty brick house in a working-class neighborhood in Memphis, miles away from the gated communities and manicured lawns I grew up with. I completely stopped buying expensive designer clothes and adopted a strict, unwavering uniform of plain, monochrome basics, black slacks, navy sweaters, gray button-down shirts, sturdy work boots. It was highly functional. I could go straight from crawling under a dusty server rack to meeting a rough-around-the-edges warehouse manager without worrying about ruining an expensive hemline or looking completely out of place. More importantly, I fiercely wanted Pulse Route Systems to stand entirely on its own merit. I refused to let anyone look at me and see a wealthy heiress playing at business to pass the time. I needed the hospital administrators and the seasoned logistics foreman to trust my competence, my grit, and my system, not my bank account or my last name. Ironically, it was this exact deliberate simplicity that became the very weapon my family used to convict me of utter failure. In the superficial ecosystem of Belle Meade, success was always incredibly loud. Success was worn boldly on your wrist in the form of a heavy gold watch, parked aggressively in your circular driveway, and broadcast loudly at high society charity auctions through massive, highly publicized financial donations. To my parents and my brother, a woman who was 34 years old, driving an old truck, wearing unbranded clothes, and stubbornly refusing to brag about her career could only mean one specific thing. It meant she had failed miserably. It meant the rebellious phase had ended in a quiet, humiliating defeat, and she was just too stubborn and proud to admit it and come crawling back home for a generous handout. They looked at my plain gray sweaters and saw only poverty. They looked at my calloused hands and saw a distinct lack of refinement. They looked at my quiet demeanor at the rare family dinners I attended and assumed I had absolutely nothing worth saying because I had achieved nothing worth celebrating. They never bothered to look any closer. If they had possessed even a tiny fraction of genuine curiosity, They might have noticed the absolute exhaustion in my eyes was not from defeat, but from the immense, crushing weight of keeping an entire regional medical grid functioning. They might have noticed that the cheap folding chairs in the cold warehouse had eventually been replaced by a state-of-the-art emergency command center. They might have noticed that the tiny, desperate regional contracts had steadily multiplied into a massive, heavily fortified network spanning across multiple state lines, moving millions of dollars in life-saving freight every single week. But they never looked. They were entirely blinded by their own narrow, rigid definition of worth. They desperately needed me to perform success in a way they could easily understand and brag about to their wealthy peers at the country club, because I flatly refused to put on that hollow performance. They completely missed the silent, unstoppable empire I was building right beneath their feet. They thought I was a fragile disappointment hiding quietly in the shadows, entirely unaware that the shadows were exactly where I was forging the strongest steel. And I was more than happy to let them keep believing that convenient lie, right up until the exact moment the truth became impossible for them to ignore. My family comfortably dismissed me with a single, highly condescending phrase. To them, I was just the girl doing logistics. They pictured me sitting in a dusty room, moving boxes of cheap goods around on a clipboard. They had absolutely no concept of the silent, massive empire that Pulseroute had become. While they were busy organizing charity galas and debating the merits of imported marble for their real estate developments, my system was quietly acting as the vital, beating heart of the medical supply chain across the entire southern United States. We were the unbreakable link for hundreds of regional hospitals, desperately underfunded dialysis centers, regional blood banks, and massive networks of independent pharmacies spanning from the humid coasts of Florida all the way to the dry plains of West Texas. When the world was calm, we were entirely invisible. But when the world broke down, we were the only thing holding the line, every single time a hurricane season battered the Gulf Coast, sending storm surges into coastal cities. Pulseroute was already moving. Every time a brutal summer heat wave threatened to melt the asphalt on the major interstates, or a sudden, severe ice storm paralyzed the mountain passes of the Appalachians, our predictive algorithms were running at full capacity. We rerouted the temperature-sensitive medications, the life-saving negative O blood, and the critical surgical equipment long before the hospital administrators even realized their primary delivery trucks were trapped in miles of gridlock. This was not the type of sleek, highly photogenic achievement that looked good on a polished social media profile. It was messy, it was stressful, and it was relentlessly demanding. But it was tangible. It actually kept vulnerable human beings breathing when the established, bloated supply chains completely collapsed under pressure. I built this company with a philosophy that was the exact opposite of the modern startup culture. We did not follow the reckless, heavily publicized model of burning through millions of dollars of venture capital just to create the illusion of rapid expansion. We did not have lavish office parties, and we certainly did not hire expensive public relations firms to secure fluff pieces in tech magazines. Pulseroute grew on the back of hard, unyielding reality. We grew through actual, verifiable revenue. We secured incredibly sticky, recurring contracts because we simply refused to fail our clients. It was a cycle of tightly controlled, fiercely protected growth, because I stubbornly refused to take on outside investors who would demand quick returns over long-term stability. I still held exactly 44% of the company shares. In the current corporate landscape, maintaining that level of ownership in an enterprise moving that much capital was almost entirely unheard of. It gave me absolute, unquestionable control over our mission. That control was reflected heavily in the people I chose to surround myself with. If you walked onto my operations floor, you would not find a single person who cared about looking important. My workforce was not composed of flashy, overconfident tech prodigies fresh out of elite universities, speaking exclusively in hollow corporate buzzwords. My people were forged in actual fire. I hired seasoned night shift dispatchers who possessed the rare, incredible ability to remain completely calm while frantically trying to reroute a convoy of medical supplies around a massive, multi-vehicle highway pileup at 3 o'clock in the morning. I hired former long-haul truckers who knew exactly which secondary county roads could safely support the weight of a fully loaded 18-wheeler when the main bridges were flooded out. I actively recruited transition trauma nurses who understood the precise, terrifying difference between a delayed shipment of standard bandages and a critically delayed shipment of specialized cardiac medication. I employed warehouse specialists who moved with athletic precision, treating every single pallet as if a life depended on it, because they knew that very often. A life actually did. To my team, the concept of a crisis was not an interesting abstract theory to be debated on a popular business podcast. A crisis was a physical, ticking clock, and they treated every single second with the profound respect it deserved. This undeniable, ground-level reality was the exact reason Forbes finally came knocking on our reinforced metal doors. They were absolutely not interested in pitching a shallow, predictable narrative about a wealthy, privileged daughter engaging in a rebellious startup venture. Their senior editorial team was actively searching for the real stories. They were dedicating their massive, highly anticipated holiday cover issue to the people who were quietly building the invisible, essential infrastructure of America. When Nora Bellamy first reached out to my office to request an interview, my immediate, instinctual response was a firm and absolute rejection. I harbored a deep, abiding hatred for the very idea of becoming a public media symbol. I had spent 7 years deliberately avoiding the spotlight, focusing entirely on the work. I did not want my face plastered across newsstands. I did not want strangers dissecting my life, and I certainly did not want my family to suddenly notice my existence just because a prestigious magazine told them I was suddenly valuable. I formally declined her request 3 separate times. But Nora was incredibly persistent. She did not take my polite refusals as the final answer. Instead, she booked a commercial flight from New York directly to Memphis, took a cheap cab to our industrial park, and sat patiently in my incredibly modest lobby until I finally agreed to give her 10 minutes of my time. She walked into my cluttered, windowless office, sat down in the squeaky visitor chair, and looked me dead in the eye. She did not try to flatter my ego or promise me endless industry connections. Instead, she said the one single sentence that possessed the power to make me stop and genuinely reconsider everything. "Everly, your work is far too important to remain invisible." I sat in silence, listening to the muffled, chaotic sounds of the dispatch floor bleeding through my thin walls. I thought about the massive, sluggish national logistics corporations that still refused to adopt predictive routing because they prioritized short-term profit margins over emergency preparedness. I realized that keeping PulseRoute a total secret was no longer protecting my company. It was actively holding back the industry standard. I finally looked back at Nora and agreed to the interview, but only under a set of incredibly rigid, non-negotiable conditions. I demanded that the resulting article focus intensely on the collective brilliance of my team, the complex architecture of our software system, and the physical reality of the supply chain. I strictly forbade her from framing the piece as a dramatic, heavily sensationalized story of a lone, wealthy woman striking out on her own to exact some kind of petty, public revenge against her prominent, dismissive family. I wanted the narrative to be about the vital infrastructure of the nation, absolutely nothing else. Nora agreed to my terms without a single moment of hesitation. But as I signed the formal consent forms, a much deeper, colder truth settled heavily into my chest. Despite my insistence on keeping my family out of the article, I knew exactly what the resulting publication would do to them. For 7 long, exhausting years, I had fiercely protected this fragile enterprise. I had shielded it from my father's condescension and my brother's mockery. Now that the enterprise was an undeniable, towering fortress of success, I realized with absolute clarity that I owed them nothing. I did not owe them the privilege of suddenly stepping into my world to claim a piece of the credit. I certainly did not owe them advanced warning. They had never once offered me even a fraction of the basic, fundamental respect that a family should freely give. They had only ever viewed me as a liability to their carefully constructed social standing. So, I would let the embargo stand. I would let the magazine print the undeniable facts. The sheer, overwhelming scale of my success was going to be delivered directly to them, not as an olive branch, but as a finalized verdict. The system I had built in the dark was finally going to step out into the blinding light, and they were going to have to look at it, whether they wanted to or not. The moment the call with Warren ended, the residual heat of sudden anger evaporated completely from my chest, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. I did not throw my mobile phone. I did not punch the heavy metal desk. In the unforgiving world of high-stakes corporate logistics, an emotional outburst is a severe operational liability. Preparation is the only true leverage. I immediately opened my contact directory and dialed June Halper. June was the chief legal counsel for Pulse Route Systems, a brilliant, terrifyingly sharp woman who had spent 15 brutal years dissecting hostile corporate takeovers in Chicago before migrating south for a supposedly quieter life. She answered my call on the second ring, her background silent. "June, we need to build a firewall," I said, my voice dropping into a flat, professional register. "Who exactly is invading?" she asked, her tone instantly matching mine. "My family," I replied. "The magazine piece drops in 2 weeks, once it goes live on the national wire. They are going to realize exactly how much capital we are moving. They will absolutely try to attach themselves to it. I need a comprehensive bulletproof legal package on my desk by tomorrow morning." I listed my demands with absolute clinical precision. I wanted updated, notarized corporate certificates confirming my exact shareholding percentages. I needed binding, ironclad documentation solidifying my exclusive executive voting rights. More importantly, I instructed her to draft a blanket cease and desist letter regarding the unauthorized use of our brand name and my personal image rights. If Warren or Grayson even briefly entertained the thought of dropping the Pulse Route name into one of their glossy real estate pitch decks to woo vulnerable investors, I wanted a legal guillotine ready to drop on their necks within 60 seconds. After hanging up with June, I walked straight out of my office and summoned Marisol and Theo into the glass-walled conference room. They walked in carrying fresh, steaming mugs of black coffee, instantly sensing the sudden, heavy shift in the atmospheric pressure of the building. I did not waste a single second with polite pleasantries. I laid out the exact tactical situation. I told them about the upcoming cover story, the inevitable media fallout, and the highly predictable Hayes family playbook. Once the issue hits the newsstands on the morning of December 25th, my father and my brother will pivot instantly. I warned them, keeping my voice low and dangerously steady. Right now, they genuinely think I am a humiliating failure playing with delivery trucks. The second they see the formal valuation estimates in print, they will aggressively rebrand me as their prodigal daughter. They will try to show up here at the facility. They will try to act like they were deeply instrumental in our success. They might even try to bypass me entirely and contact the two of you directly to negotiate some kind of strategic family partnership. Theo let out a harsh, bitter laugh, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Let them try to bypass you. I will personally lock their credentials out of the main server room before they reach the parking lot." Marisol leaned forward across the long table, her dark eyes narrowing with protective instinct. "Do we need to authorize extra physical security at the perimeter gates?" "Yes," I confirmed without hesitation. "Double the guard rotation starting the night of December 24th. Nobody gets past the main lobby without my explicit, direct verbal authorization. I do not care if they share my last name or claim to be an investor. Lock the building down." Before leaving the operations floor for the night, I stopped by the communications desk to see Ellis Wade. Ellis was our director of public relations, a master of highly controlled, impenetrable corporate messaging. I briefed him on the impending media storm and gave him his marching orders. "I want a single, Universally applied press statement drafted and ready to go by tomorrow. I instructed him. Keep it strictly under 50 words. It needs to clearly state that we deeply respect our personal privacy. We have absolutely zero comment on my family dynamics and our sole, unwavering focus remains entirely on our operational team and the vulnerable communities we serve. If any tabloid reporter, business journalist, or local gossip columnist asks a single question about my father or my brother, you read that exact statement and you hang up the phone. Do not give them a single inch of breathing room. Understood completely, Ellis said, his fingers already flying across his mechanical keyboard. I did not leave the facility until well past midnight, when I finally walked into my quiet, dark brick house in Memphis. The silence felt incredibly heavy. I poured myself a tall glass of cold tap water, sat down heavily on my faded living room couch, and pulled my phone out of my coat pocket. I opened my digital message archives. I did not do this to wallow in pointless self-pity or to reopen old wounds. I did it to permanently harden my resolve. I scrolled back through 7 years of casual, digital dismissals. There was a message from Grayson from 3 years ago, sent right after I had proudly secured our very first major regional hospital contract. I had sent him a quick picture of our first independent storage warehouse. His reply was a crying, laughing emoji, followed by 2 highly condescending words, "Palette Princess." There was a text from my father from 2 Thanksgivings ago, sent exactly 10 minutes before I arrived at the gated estate. Please wear something presentable tonight and do not talk about your warehouses or your truck drivers at the dinner table. We have civilized company joining us. And then there were the countless messages from my mother. Dozens of them. Perfectly and consistently spaced out over the years. Not a single one of them ever asked if I was healthy, if my business was surviving, or if I was happy. They were all strict, logistical commands dictating her social calendar. We need an even number for the charity table tonight. Please attend. Please show up at exactly 6 o'clock so the hired photographer can get a family group shot before the real guests arrive. I sat alone in the dark and read every single word. I let the cold, indifferent reality of their purely conditional love wash over me, completely sealing the final, vulnerable cracks in my armor. The next afternoon, during a rare, 2-hour lull in the regional weather crisis, I left the industrial park and drove directly to a high-end bespoke tailor in downtown Memphis. For 7 long years, I had actively, intentionally shrunk my physical presence. I had worn cheap, unbranded clothing to seamlessly blend into the background, desperately trying not to trigger my family's elitist judgment or intimidate my hard-working warehouse crew. But hiding in plain sight was no longer a viable strategic option. If I was going to confidently step onto the battlefield my family had created, I was going to dress the part. I purchased my first suit in nearly a decade. I did not choose something flashy, aggressively bright, or overly decorative. I selected a dense, incredibly heavy charcoal wool. The tailoring was razor sharp, cutting clean, uncompromisingly powerful lines across my shoulders and waist. It was the exact kind of garment that silently commanded an entire room the very second the wearer walked through the heavy wooden doors. It was expensive, it was intimidating, and it was entirely mine. I bought it as a permanent physical marker. I was officially done making other people comfortable at the direct expense of my own presence. Returning to my office later that evening, I found a thick, expensive, cream-colored envelope sitting squarely on my keyboard. It had been forwarded from my old Nashville mailing address. It was a formal, embossed invitation to the Civic Relief Foundation's annual year-end gala. It was the most exclusive, high-net-worth philanthropic event in the entire state of Tennessee, heavily attended by powerful politicians, major hospital executives, and wealthy corporate titans. It was scheduled for the evening of December 25th. It was being held at a luxury hotel located less than 2 miles from my family's Belmead estate. My family would certainly be there, parading their generational wealth and aggressively rubbing shoulders with their potential real estate investors. They had just uninvited me from their morning brunch specifically to hide me from those exact same people. I pulled a heavy black ink pen from my top desk drawer and firmly checked the box marked attending. I would absolutely be returning to the very city that had just expelled me. But the terms of engagement had shifted entirely. I walked out of my office and handed the sealed response card directly to Ellis. "Keep this completely off the master public calendar," I ordered him strictly. "Do not leak my travel schedule to the local press under any circumstances, and absolutely do not let anyone in Nashville know I am coming to this event. If a confrontation is going to happen, it is going to happen strictly on my territory, under my absolute control." The rest of the week dragged on. A massive blur of severe storm tracking, vital server maintenance, and silent, heavy preparation. Late on a Friday evening, the final, irreversible piece fell into place. My computer monitor chimed sharply with an incoming message notification. It was a single, definitive email from the senior editorial desk at Forbes. I clicked the message open. The body of the email contained only 2 words: "Cover locked." I sat back in my chair and stared at the stark black text against the glowing white screen. There was absolutely no going back now. The massive commercial printing presses were already rolling. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the future pressing down on my shoulders. I knew exactly what that short email meant. My entire life was about to be violently cleaved down the middle, separated forever into 2 distinct, irreconcilable eras. There was everything that had happened before that morning, and there was the reckoning that would come after. When Nora Bellamy walked through the heavy, reinforced security doors of our Memphis headquarters, I did not direct her to a mahogany-lined boardroom or offer her a crystal glass of sparkling water. I met her right at the busy edge of the main operations floor. The massive digital map dominating the far wall was flashing with urgent amber warnings, signaling a critical shortage of type O negative blood in the northern counties due to the severe winter storm currently freezing the state. "Watch your step," I told her, navigating swiftly through a tight maze of active workstations and tangled server cables. My lead dispatcher, a seasoned veteran named Marcus, waved me over frantically before I could even introduce myself properly. "The interstate bridge just iced over completely," he reported, his voice tight with genuine stress. "We have a transport carrying specialized burn unit plasma trapped on the eastern approach. Highway Patrol is shutting down all the outbound lanes. Reroute them immediately through the Old County Highway," I ordered, not missing a single beat. "Contact the local sheriff's department to clear a direct path for the truck. Tell them it is a Tier 1 medical emergency. Do not take no for an answer." I turned back to Nora. She had her digital audio recorder out, her sharp eyes taking in the chaotic, completely unglamorous symphony of the room. I was wearing my standard dark charcoal trousers and a plain navy sweater, my hair pulled back into a messy, utilitarian knot. There was absolutely no room in this environment for the polished, flawless appearances my family worshipped. "You were asking via email about our predictive modeling," I said, leaning over a dispatcher terminal to manually authorize the new emergency route. "The system does not just react to bad weather after it happens. It constantly analyzes supply consumption rates at individual hospitals, cross-references them with live regional traffic patterns, and predicts a localized supply chain failure up to 48 hours before the hospital administrator even realizes their storage shelves are going to be completely empty." Nora followed closely behind me as I paced the length of the busy floor. "And the specific margin of error?" she asked, her clear voice cutting easily through the loud background noise of ringing phones and frantic typing. "On a severe night exactly like tonight, 20 minutes, I replied, watching the small, blinking plasma transport dot slowly change direction on the massive screen. "If we delay a critical reroute decision by 20 minutes, a regional surgical center has to completely cancel their emergency operations. People do not just get slightly inconvenienced. They suffer immense physical pain. Some of them die. That is the raw reality of what we do here." Nora stopped writing and looked directly at me. She took in my scuffed leather work boots, the heavy dark circles under my eyes from days of minimal sleep, and the absolute lack of corporate pretense. She was an exceptional journalist because she knew exactly when to shift the conversation from the mechanical to the deeply personal. "You grew up in Belle Meade," she stated softly. It was not a harsh accusation, but a careful, deliberate bridge to the real story. That is a world composed entirely of exclusive country clubs, legacy university admissions, and carefully curated public images. It is a place where perception is the only currency that truly matters. Does your family actually understand what you are building here? Do they comprehend the scale of this operation? I froze for a fraction of a second. My initial, deeply ingrained instinct was to deploy the standard, highly polished public relations deflection that Ellis had prepared for me. I could easily say my family was supportive in their own unique way and quickly change the subject back to the software algorithms. But I looked at Nora, a woman who had flown across the entire country to tell the honest truth about the invisible infrastructure of America. I realized that fiercely protecting my family's fabricated, perfect image was exactly what had kept me suffering in the dark for so long. "No," I said, my voice quiet but undeniably firm. "They do not understand it at all, because they have never actually bothered to ask." Nora's pen hovered motionless over her lined notebook. "Not even once." "Not once," I confirmed, feeling the cold, hard truth settle permanently into the room. In fact, my father called me just a few days ago. He explicitly asked me to skip our annual Christmas brunch. I pulled my personal mobile phone from my pocket, unlocked the digital screen, and navigated directly to my saved text messages. I did not want this interview to devolve into a dramatic, one-sided narrative of a scorned daughter throwing wild, unsubstantiated accusations at her wealthy parents. I wanted the narrative grounded entirely in cold, undeniable reality. I handed the device over to Nora. He sent a follow-up confirmation just to be absolutely certain I understood my correct place in the hierarchy, I explained, gesturing to the glowing screen. "You can read it yourself." Nora took the phone carefully. She read the short message silently. The exact wording Warren had used was perfectly polite, surgically precise, and utterly devastating. It read, "Just confirming our previous phone conversation. Given the high-profile nature of Grayson's business guests this year, it is best if we keep the family circle incredibly tight. We will celebrate with you another time. Please do not make any alternative plans to drop by the estate." Nora handed the phone back to me, her expression shifting rapidly from professional journalistic curiosity to profound, quiet disbelief. "He is actively hiding you," she concluded with terrifying accuracy, "because you do not fit the glossy aesthetic of his real estate pitch." "Exactly," I said, tucking the phone safely back into my pocket. "He is hosting a major financial group to secure vital funding for my brother's massive new luxury commercial development. He desperately needs the dining room to look completely flawless. A daughter who manages freight logistics does not fit the billionaire profile." Nora let out a sharp, unexpected breath. She opened a separate, thick manila file folder she had been carrying tightly under her arm since she arrived. "Everly," she began, her tone carrying a sudden, electric weight that made my pulse quicken. "Do you know exactly who is leading that specific financial group attending your father's brunch?" "Mitchell Voss," I replied instantly. "He is a highly prominent healthcare real estate investor. My father and my brother mention his name constantly. He is their golden ticket." Nora shook her head slowly, a faint, razor-sharp smile playing at the very corners of her mouth. "Mitchell Voss is not just a real estate investor. He owns and operates the Voss Care Hospital Network. It is one of the largest independent medical groups in the entire southern region, and according to our internal research files for this specific article, Voss Care has been relying exclusively on Pulse Route systems to manage their emergency supply chains across 3 different states for over 1 year. I stared at her, the chaotic noise of the busy dispatch floor momentarily fading into complete, stunning silence. The irony was so immense, so perfectly constructed, that it was almost suffocating. "Are you absolutely certain about that?" I asked, my mind racing to connect the incredible data points. "I am 100% positive," Nora confirmed, tapping her neatly printed dossier. In fact, when I interviewed Mr. Voss's chief operating officer late last week, he explicitly mentioned that Mitchell Voss has been actively trying to schedule a private, high-level meeting with the brilliant, mysterious software founder who signs all the corporate service contracts simply as E. Hayes. He considers your predictive routing software the absolute crown jewel of his operational efficiency. He credits you with saving his network millions of dollars. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with terrifying, absolute precision. Warren had cruelly banished me from his home specifically to impress a powerful man whose entire medical empire was currently being kept afloat by the very company my father deeply despised. My family was bending over backward to worship a billionaire who was secretly desperate to meet the daughter they had just thrown away. I looked back up at the glowing digital map, watching the small blue dot representing the plasma delivery successfully navigate the icy, dangerous county road and pull safely into the hospital receiving bay. We had just saved another life while my father worried about the table centerpieces. "I am not asking you to censor this piece," I told Nora, meeting her steady gaze with absolute, unwavering clarity. "I am not asking you to remove the specific details about my family, their rejection, or the Christmas brunch. I only have one strict, non-negotiable condition for this entire publication." "Name it," Nora said, her pen poised and ready. "If you tell this story," I instructed her, my voice echoing slightly against the glass walls of the facility, "you tell it exactly as it is. Do not frame this as a sensationalized, petty revenge plot meant to generate cheap internet traffic. I did not spend 7 years building this vital company just to punish my parents. I built this company to save lives. What happens to my family's pristine social reputation on the morning of December 25th is not my grand revenge. It is simply the unavoidable, catastrophic price of underestimating someone for far too long." At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on December 25th, the digital embargo officially lifted. The Forbes holiday issue went live across every major online platform simultaneously. My phone vibrated against the cold metal desk with the very first news alert. Then came another, and another. The notification sounds quickly merged into a continuous, unrelenting mechanical hum. The cover image was stark, unedited, and incredibly commanding. It featured me standing on the Memphis operations floor, bathed in the harsh blue light of the routing screens. The bold headline beneath my name declared me the silent architect keeping the entire southern United States medical supply chain from complete collapse. Within a single hour, the digital landscape completely exploded. I had never maintained a public social media presence, but Ellis had set up monitoring algorithms for the company. He stood beside my desk, his eyes wide as he scrolled through the massive incoming data wave. Thousands of posts flooded the internet. A seasoned head nurse in a rural Louisiana clinic wrote a viral post detailing the exact night Pulse Route successfully delivered emergency ventilators during a Category 4 hurricane. A long-haul truck driver shared a raw, emotional video explaining how our precise routing system saved him from driving directly into a lethal flash flood. Owners of independent pharmacies, dialysis clinic administrators, and night shift doctors all added their voices to the rising chorus. They were loudly thanking the invisible system that had kept their patients breathing. This was the profound, undeniable proof of my life's work. It was a massive wave of raw, human gratitude that I had deliberately kept entirely hidden from my superficial family. 200 miles away in Nashville, the annual Hayes family Christmas brunch was just beginning its meticulously choreographed routine. According to the furious, panicked text messages I would later read from my mother, the scene was a picture of extreme, suffocating opulence. The sprawling dining room in Belle Meade was decorated with expensive imported winter florals. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne. Warren was holding court near the grand fireplace, smiling his perfectly practiced corporate smile, while Grayson prepared to unveil his massive Cumberland Crown project. Mitchell Voss, the billionaire crown jewel of their guest list, was seated at the place of honor. At exactly 9 o'clock, the atmosphere violently shattered. It did not happen with a loud shout, but with a dozen simultaneous digital chimes. Every high-powered guest in the room felt their mobile devices vibrate with the breaking business news alert. The room's ambient chatter dropped into an uncomfortable, confused murmur as wealthy investors and socialites collectively looked down at their glowing screens. Mitchell Voss set his crystal glass down on the pristine linen tablecloth. He adjusted his reading glasses, staring intently at the Forbes cover article on his tablet. The heavy silence in the dining room became absolute. Voss slowly lifted his head, locking his piercing gaze entirely on my father. "Warren," Voss said, his voice easily carrying across the sudden quiet. "Everly Hayes. Is she your daughter? Why is she not sitting at this table right now?" The question hung in the warm, scented air like a live grenade. Warren completely froze, the blood draining rapidly from his face. He had absolutely no prepared script for this specific disaster. He opened his mouth to deliver a smooth deflection, but the brutal, undeniable truth was already staring everyone in the face. Grayson desperately tried to salvage the morning. He stepped forward, gesturing broadly toward the expensive architectural models of his luxury real estate development. He raised his voice, attempting to redirect the powerful crowd back to his heavily rehearsed pitch. But the momentum was entirely dead. The room was no longer looking at the supposedly successful son. Instead, the most influential financiers in the state were leaning across the table, intensely discussing the woman Warren had secretly banished from the house just hours prior. They were trading the staggering valuation figures from the magazine article. They were whispering about my 44% ownership stake. The very people my father had desperately wanted to impress were now looking at him with clear, undisguised suspicion, silently wondering what kind of terrible judgment led a man to hide an industry titan in his own family. Back in my Memphis command center, my mobile phone was practically melting from the sheer volume of incoming calls. The caller ID flashed wildly with names from Belle Meade. My father called 5 times in a row. Grayson called twice. My mother sent a barrage of frantic voicemails. I ignored every single one of them, tossing the device face down onto my desk. I had zero interest in their sudden, manufactured panic. My attention was entirely locked on the massive routing monitors dominating the wall. Outside the reinforced walls of our warehouse, a brutal winter front was actively dropping sheets of freezing rain across the Arkansas border. A vital delivery route heading straight toward a heavily populated dialysis center in Little Rock was turning completely red on our screens. The local roads were freezing over, and the transport truck carrying the specialized filtering fluids was dangerously close to sliding off a steep embankment. "Get the county emergency services on the radio," I ordered my team, my voice slicing cleanly through the chaos. "We need a salt truck escort for the next 12 miles. If that clinic does not receive this specific shipment by 3 o'clock this afternoon, 30 patients will miss their critical treatment window. Make it happen." While my family scrambled desperately to save their fragile social standing, my team and I were executing a highly coordinated tactical maneuver to save actual lives. That was my only priority. By noon, the absolute humiliation in Nashville had clearly become too much for the Hayes family to endure. They could not control the narrative over the phone, so they took physical action. Warren, Celeste, and Grayson climbed directly into their black luxury sedan, still wearing their expensive, tailored holiday garments, and drove the dark, icy highway straight toward Memphis. They were not driving down here because they had experienced a sudden, miraculous revelation about my inherent worth as a human being. They were speeding toward my facility in a state of sheer, Unadulterated panic because the entire world had just witnessed the exact empire they had stubbornly refused to see. When they finally arrived at the industrial park, I did not rush home to meet them in the comfortable, familiar setting of my quiet brick house. I wanted them to face the undeniable reality of my existence on my own territory. The heavy security gates at Pulse Route remained firmly locked. I stood in the dead center of the operations floor, watching the digital map confirm that the Little Rock dialysis shipment had successfully arrived at the clinic's loading dock. Only after the crisis was completely averted did I pick up the internal radio. I instructed the perimeter guards to finally allow the Hayes family vehicle into the complex. I told security to escort them directly past the noisy loading bays, through the freezing exterior corridors, and straight up to the main command center. They were about to step out of their perfectly curated, heavily glossed illusion and walk directly into the relentless, unforgiving, and incredibly powerful reality I had built with my own two hands. The heavy steel security doors of the main operations floor slid open with a sharp, intimidating mechanical hiss. I stood completely still at the head of the central dispatch table, my hands resting flat against the cool, industrial metal surface. The dark charcoal wool suit I had purchased earlier that week felt exactly like a tailored suit of armor, completely transforming my physical posture. I was no longer the quiet, shrinking daughter desperately trying to blend into the patterned wallpaper of a lavish Belmead dining room. I was the absolute, unquestioned authority in a room that actively dictated the daily survival of millions of people. Warren Hayes stepped onto the busy floor, closely followed by Celeste and Grayson. They were all still wearing their immaculate, highly expensive holiday attire. My mother clutched a designer leather handbag tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously around the cavernous, brightly lit industrial space as if she expected the machinery to attack her. Grayson looked deeply uncomfortable and entirely out of his element, constantly tugging at the tight collar of his imported silk tie. But my father simply stared. He looked at the massive digital tracking boards displaying complex weather patterns. He looked at the long rows of focused logistics engineers. And finally, he looked directly at me. He saw the undeniable way the entire room operated seamlessly around my presence, every single person waiting silently for my next command. He did not offer a polite greeting. He certainly did not offer a genuine apology for cruelly banishing me from his home just a few short hours prior. Instead, his face rapidly hardened into a rigid mask of deep, highly offended indignation. "Why did you deliberately hide all of this from the family?" he demanded, his voice echoing slightly over the low, constant hum of the server towers. I did not raise my voice to match his rising anger. I did not need to. "Why did none of you ever ask a single question kind enough to make me want to answer?" Warren took an aggressive step forward, his jaw tight with frustration. "We are your family, Everly. You deliberately humiliated us in front of the most important financial investors in the entire state. You let us believe you were struggling in some rundown, dangerous warehouse." "I never once lied about where I was or what I was doing," I replied, my tone razor-sharp and completely devoid of any familial warmth. "I simply stopped trying to convince you that my life had actual value. You decided my career was a humiliating failure all on your own. Do you remember when you sat me down in your private study and offered to buy me a respectable job at your commercial real estate firm? You desperately wanted to rescue me from the profound embarrassment of manual labor. Grayson, do you remember sending me laughing emojis and calling me a pallet princess when I proudly showed you the very first storage facility I ever leased? Mom, how many countless times did you deliberately change the subject to charity floral arrangements? The absolute second I mentioned securing a new regional hospital contract. Neither my mother nor my brother could manage to meet my steady gaze. Warren opened his mouth to launch into a defensive argument, but I cut him off smoothly and entirely. "You did not drive all the way across the state to Memphis today because you suddenly realized you were wrong," I stated firmly, my words striking like physical blows. "You are standing in this room right now because a prominent magazine cover told you I was finally worth your precious time. You only showed up when the rest of the civilized world decided I had measurable value. From the busy edge of the dispatch floor, Marisol walked over to join the confrontation. She did not raise her voice or attempt to inject theatrical drama into the tense situation. She simply carried a thick stack of printed shipping manifests, her expression utterly exhausted but fiercely, uncompromisingly protective of the space we had built. 3 years ago, during the massive regional medication crisis, Everly slept on that raw concrete floor over there for 3 consecutive nights, Marisol said, pointing a plastic pen toward the cold, uncarpeted far corner of the room. She stayed awake for 72 hours straight, manually routing emergency asthma inhalers to rural pediatric wards while the entire state power grid failed. I remember that specific weekend incredibly clearly, because your family's public social media accounts were actively posting high-resolution photographs of crystal champagne flutes and expensive imported Christmas wreaths. Do not walk into this secure building and act like you were unfairly denied the privilege of celebrating her massive success, when you entirely refused to participate in the brutal, exhausting reality of building it. Warren bristled instantly, turning his dark glare toward Marisol. This is a strictly private family matter. You need to step away. Absolutely nothing about this company is private to you anymore. A new, incredibly sharp voice interrupted. June Halper emerged smoothly from the glass-walled legal office, carrying a single, thin manila folder. She walked directly to my side and placed a perfectly preserved document flat onto the metal table, sliding it deliberately toward my father's hands. What exactly is this? Warren snapped, stubbornly refusing to touch the thick paper. That is a legally authenticated scanned copy of a certified bank check, June explained, her voice carrying the absolute, chilling authority of a veteran corporate attorney who was highly accustomed to destroying men exactly like him. It is for $20,000. It was the very first piece of seed funding Pulse Root Systems ever received. Look very closely at the signature on the bottom line. Warren. My father finally broke his stubborn posture and looked down at the document. The healthy color drained from his face with terrifying speed. The elegant, looping signature at the bottom of the check belonged to Eleanor Hayes, his own mother, my grandmother. Beneath her familiar handwriting was a short, precise note written in dark blue ink, "Build what people actually need." She sent that to me 7 long years ago, I told him, watching the profound, paralyzing shock completely overtake his features. She completely understood what I was trying to do from the very first day I explained the supply chain failure to her, and she explicitly swore me to total secrecy. Do you want to know exactly why she hid her financial investment from you? Dad. Because she knew exactly who you were. She knew you would treat my vital ambition as a frivolous, childish joke. She knew you would try your hardest to suffocate it to protect your country club image. The only person in the entire Hayes family who ever truly believed in me was the one person who knew better than to trust you with the truth. The massive revelation struck Warren like a physical freight train. The absolute certainty of his own powerful matriarch betting heavily against his judgment left him completely, utterly speechless. But Grayson, who was entirely oblivious to the heavy emotional devastation settling over the room, saw only a massive public relations crisis that desperately needed aggressive managing. He stepped forward, his deeply ingrained corporate survival instincts entirely overriding his basic human decency. "Okay, fine," Grayson said, clapping his hands together once loudly as if attempting to magically break the crushing tension. "Mistakes were clearly made. We massively underestimated you. Everly, we fully admit it. But we need to fix the terrible optics of this situation immediately. The media news cycle is moving way too fast. We should take a high-quality family photograph right now, right here on the active operations floor. We will draft a joint press release with your communications team. You can help the family get past this unfortunate public misunderstanding. We can easily spin this as a massive, unified family triumph, a story of reconciliation." I stared at my older brother, genuinely astounded by his profound, terrifying lack of self-awareness. before I could even begin to dismantle Grayson's completely ridiculous, soulless proposal. Warren suddenly recovered his speaking voice. He cleared his throat loudly, aggressively adjusting his tailored suit jacket. His eyes darted quickly toward the massive digital map of the southern region, taking in the sheer volume of active, high-value freight. His momentary shock had rapidly mutated right back into calculated, predatory greed. "Grayson is entirely right," Warren said, his tone shifting effortlessly into the smooth, highly persuasive cadence he used to close deals in luxury boardrooms. "We desperately need a united front today. In fact, considering your massive operational expansion across the South, this situation could be highly beneficial for everyone involved. You are clearly going to need a much larger, state-of-the-art regional distribution hub very soon to handle this volume. We should strongly consider placing your new central facility directly inside the Cumberland Crown commercial development. It would perfectly anchor the entire project. Mitchell Voss would personally sign the massive investment paperwork by tomorrow morning if he knew Pulse Route Systems was our primary, guaranteed commercial tenant." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his transactional request echoed loudly in my ears. The final, microscopic shred of hope I had unknowingly harbored a tiny, foolish hope that they might actually feel genuine human remorse was permanently and violently extinguished. They had not driven across the freezing state to apologize to their daughter. They had not come to make amends for a lifetime of casual, targeted cruelty. They had driven here strictly to harvest my success. They wanted to aggressively weaponize their own public shame, forcibly converting my hard-earned, unimpeachable reputation into a highly lucrative real estate asset to save their collapsing financial deal. I looked at my father, then at my brother, and finally at my mother, who was silently, desperately nodding in agreement with their horrific, opportunistic business proposal. "You really have absolutely no idea who I am," I said softly, the words carrying an absolute, freezing finality. I reached over the console and pressed the heavy red button on my desk, instantly opening a direct, facility-wide communication line to the front security desk. "Marcus," I said clearly and calmly into the microphone, "please send the perimeter security team up to the main operations floor. We have 3 unauthorized corporate visitors who need to be escorted out of the building and completely removed from the industrial park premises. Immediately." Warren's eyes widened in genuine, undisguised panic as the heavy sound of tactical boots echoed loudly down the exterior tile hallway. "Everly, you cannot possibly be serious. We are trying to help you secure a massive generational legacy." "I have already secured my legacy," I replied, turning my back on my family to face the glowing, pulsing dispatch monitors that represented the real world. "And your name is not anywhere on it. Get out of my building." The immediate aftermath of the Forbes publication was not just a celebration of my company. It quickly mutated into a swift, merciless public autopsy of the Belle Meade elite. The Hayes family had always operated under the arrogant assumption that they were the absolute masters of public relations. They believed they could perfectly control exactly how the world perceived them by carefully curating their guest lists, purchasing expensive tables at high-profile charity galas, and hiding anything that did not flawlessly match their glossy aesthetic. But the internet is incredibly ruthless, and society loves nothing more than tearing down a fragile monument of hypocrisy. The public discourse shifted rapidly from praising the secretly successful daughter to aggressively dissecting the profound shallowness of the parents who had tried to erase her. Opinion columns in major business journals questioned the fundamental culture of old money families who prioritized country club appearances over genuine, undeniable innovation. My family had spent decades meticulously building a flawless social facade, and it took exactly one authentic, unedited truth to completely shatter it into a million irreparable pieces. The first massive structural collapse of their empire happened less than 48 hours after they were escorted out of my facility. Ellis walked into my office, shutting the glass door quietly behind him. He did not have to say a word. The slight, sharp smile on his face told me everything. Mitchell Voss had officially and permanently pulled out of the Cumberland Crown funding round. Voss did not withdraw his massive capital investment because I asked him to. I had never spoken a single word to the man, nor did I harbor any desire to leverage my newfound public influence to sabotage my brother. I did not have to lift a finger. Voss made the decision entirely on his own, based strictly on cold, calculated business logic. As Ellis read the summarized intelligence report from our financial analysts, the reasoning became crystal clear. Voss had concluded that if Warren and Grayson were so profoundly blinded by superficial appearances that they could not recognize a massively profitable, industry-defining logistics empire being built by their own flesh and blood, then their fundamental judgment of character was fatally flawed. If Warren Hayes was foolish enough to throw away a logistical genius because she wore plain work boots instead of designer heels, he was simply too reckless to be trusted with hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate capital. The golden ticket was gone, evaporated by their own staggering vanity. Back in Nashville, the panic had clearly reached a fever pitch. My personal mobile phone captured the desperate, messy fallout. Over the course of 3 days, my mother, Celeste, left exactly 6 lengthy voicemails. I sat alone in my quiet living room and listened to every single one of them. They were entirely saturated with tears, her voice trembling and breaking at regular intervals. However, the profound tragedy of those messages was what she completely failed to say. She never once said she was sorry for ignoring my struggles for 7 years. She never acknowledged the deep, lingering pain of being treated like a shameful family secret. Instead, every single tearful sentence revolved entirely around the social scandal. "Everly, the women at the club are staring at me," she sobbed in the 3rd message. "Our entire reputation is in absolute ruins. People are whispering behind our backs at the grocery store. You have to issue a statement to make this scandal go away. Please, you are ruining your brother's future." She was completely incapable of seeing me as a human being who had been hurt. I was still just a public relations problem that needed to be quickly managed so she could comfortably return to drinking her afternoon tea without facing the judgmental stares of her wealthy peers. I deleted the voicemails one by one, feeling absolutely nothing but a hollow, lingering exhaustion. 4 days after the disastrous confrontation on my operations floor, a bonded courier arrived at the Pulse Route headquarters carrying a thick, heavy envelope sealed with the official Hayes corporate crest. It was a handwritten letter from my father. I opened it at my desk, expecting another aggressive legal threat or a demanding lecture. To my genuine surprise, the first page was remarkably, almost uncomfortably honest. In tight, disciplined handwriting, Warren finally admitted his catastrophic failure. He explicitly wrote that he had judged me entirely through the narrow, unforgiving lens of social status and superficial appearances. He confessed that he had completely failed to look past the dirt on my hands to see the massive foundation I was actually building. For a brief, fleeting moment as I read the bottom of page 1, I felt a dangerous, familiar ache in my chest. It was the naive, childish hope that my father had finally, truly seen me. Then, I turned over to page 2. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced entirely by his deeply ingrained, predatory business instincts, having failed to intimidate me. He was now attempting to heavily manipulate my emotions to secure a commercial lifeline. The second page was a detailed, highly persuasive proposal asking Pulse Route Systems to sign a long-term, premium lease to become the primary anchor tenant at the Cumberland Crown development. He wrote beautifully about synergy and healing. He boldly suggested that we could use the new commercial partnership to create a beautiful, highly publicized family comeback story for the media. He did not want to heal our relationship. He desperately needed my pristine corporate reputation and my massive operating budget to plug the gaping financial hole that Mitchell Voss had just blown through his sinking project, before I could even draft a perfectly cold rejection. The heavy glass door of my office swung open. June Halper marched in, her usually calm demeanor replaced by a fierce, radiating anger. She slapped a glossy, professionally bound booklet directly onto the center of my desk. "Look at page 4, June commanded, her voice dangerously low. I opened the booklet. It was a highly confidential introductory pitch deck for the Cumberland Crown project, actively being circulated by Warren to secondary lenders and private equity firms in a desperate bid to replace Voss's lost capital. Right there in the middle of the glossy pages was a high-resolution reprint of my Forbes magazine cover photo. Beneath my face was a carefully worded, incredibly deceptive paragraph. It heavily implied that Pulse Root Systems was currently engaged in advanced negotiations to become a strategic corporate partner and the central logistical anchor for the entire development. The breath caught sharply in my throat. This was the second betrayal, and in many ways, it was vastly more repulsive than being excluded from the Christmas brunch. Excluding me was born of ignorance and snobbery. This new move was born of pure, calculated parasitism. My father had spent my entire adult life looking down on me with absolute disgust. Now that the world had crowned me a success, he had the breathtaking audacity to try and wear my hard-earned victory like a borrowed coat. He was actively using my face, the very face he had just tried to hide from his wealthy friends, to steal money from unsuspecting investors. "I have the cease and desist letter fully drafted," June stated firmly, pacing the length of my office. "I can have a federal injunction filed against his firm before the courts close this afternoon. We will legally strangle this entire project today. Give me the word. Everly." I stared at the fraudulent pitch deck for a long, silent moment. I thought about the swift, immediate satisfaction of a brutal legal strike. It would undoubtedly stop him. It would force him to quietly withdraw the documents and scramble in the dark. But a quiet, legal suffocation was too clean. It allowed Warren to maintain his dignity behind closed doors. It allowed him to play the victim of a hostile corporate misunderstanding. "No," I said softly, closing the glossy booklet and sliding it back across the desk toward June. June stopped pacing and stared at me in profound disbelief. "Everly, he is actively committing commercial fraud using your registered trademark. You cannot possibly let this stand." "I am not going to let it stand," I replied, standing up from my chair and walking over to the large window overlooking the busy dispatch floor. "But I am not going to sue him today. If we crush him quietly in a courtroom, he will just spin another convenient lie to his country club friends. He will say I was being an unreasonable, vindictive daughter. He thrives in the shadows. June. He survives by twisting the truth where nobody can see the actual evidence." I turned back to face my brilliant, furious attorney. The cold, crystalline strategy had fully crystallized in my mind. "Let him keep circulating the pitch deck," I instructed her, my voice completely devoid of any hesitation. "Let him make the grand promises to the secondary lenders. Let him completely convince the local press and the city planning committee that he has the great Everly Hayes in his back pocket. We are going to let him build his entire remaining house of cards squarely on top of this massive, arrogant lie." "And then?" June asked, a slow, understanding smile finally touching the corners of her mouth. "And then," I said, "when he is standing on a public stage, perfectly confident that he has successfully manipulated his way out of the consequences of his own actions, we will break the truth. We will not destroy his project in the quiet privacy of a courtroom. We are going to let him step into the brightest spotlight possible. And we are going to tear it down exactly where he cannot possibly hide." The board of the Mid-South Emergency Procurement Consortium released their formal request for proposal early Tuesday morning. They were a massive, multi-state coalition representing thousands of regional hospitals, and they were actively seeking a central location to construct a brand new state-of-the-art medical response and distribution hub. It was the absolute crown jewel of regional logistics contracts. Whoever secured that facility would effectively control the emergency supply chain for the entire lower half of the country. Almost immediately, the local Nashville business press began buzzing with highly confident predictions. The financial columnists all seemed to share the exact same fabricated consensus. They loudly predicted that Warren Hayes would easily secure the massive facility for his Cumberland Crown development. The media narrative was incredibly predictable and entirely manufactured by my father's public relations team. The reporters speculated that in the wake of the explosive Forbes magazine article, the prodigal daughter would naturally want to rescue her family's honor. They painted a touching, completely fictitious picture of a grand corporate reunion, assuming I would eagerly sign a massive lease to anchor his struggling real estate project and publicly smooth over what they were now calling a minor, overblown private misunderstanding. Warren expertly fed this exact delusion. He gave carefully worded, exclusive quotes to friendly journalists, projecting the warm, magnanimous aura of a proud patriarch. He implied that we were in constant, daily communication. The sheer audacity of his public campaign became physically nauseating the following afternoon. Nora Bellamy sent me a highly encrypted email containing a leaked investor document that Warren was aggressively circulating to out-of-state private equity firms. I opened the file on my secure monitor and read the highlighted paragraph Nora had flagged. My father had actually put the following sentence into print. I have always fiercely encouraged Everly to pursue her vital mission of building humanitarian infrastructure, and our family is deeply committed to supporting her ongoing regional expansion. It was a lie so breathtakingly blatant, so entirely divorced from reality, that it felt like a direct, physical insult to my own memory. This was the exact same man who had told me I made the family look cheap. This was the man who had actively tried to hide my existence from his wealthy friends just a short time prior. Theo walked into my office just as I finished reading the fraudulent paragraph. He took one look at the glowing screen, read the text, and his face turned a dark, furious shade of red. "This is absolute insanity," Theo shouted, slamming his hand down flat against the heavy wooden doorframe. "He is using your name to steal money from people who do not know any better. We have to end this right now. Everly, give me the green light. I will leak every single piece of evidence we have directly to the digital press. I will post the cruel text messages from your mother. I will post the scan of your grandmother's seed money check. I will post the exact timeline of how he tried to banish you from the holiday brunch. We can completely destroy his public credibility in less than 60 minutes. I looked at Theo, completely understanding his fiery, protective rage, but I slowly shook my head. "No," I told him, keeping my voice incredibly calm and anchored. "We are absolutely not doing that." "Why not?" Theo demanded, stepping closer to my desk. "He is completely controlling the narrative. He is making you look like a compliant, obedient daughter who is coming home to save his failing empire. If we launch a massive online smear campaign, we just become another messy, dramatic family squabble for the internet to consume." I explained, leaning back in my leather chair. "People will debate the text messages. They will argue over who is right and who is wrong. It will be chaotic, loud, and incredibly unprofessional. I do not want to win a petty digital shouting match, Theo. I want to win with a concrete, irreversible business decision that absolutely nobody can overturn. We are going to let him dig his own grave in the broad daylight." While Warren was busy charming the Nashville press and spinning his elaborate web of lies, I deployed my senior technical inspection team to quietly evaluate the Cumberland Crown property. I did not send them to look at the expensive landscaping or the imported marble facades. I sent them to run rigorous, unforgiving stress tests on the fundamental infrastructure of the site. The confidential engineering report landed on my desk 3 days later, and it was utterly damning. Cumberland Crown possessed several fatal, undeniable flaws that made it completely unviable for a high-speed medical distribution center. The primary highway egress ramps were far too narrow and possessed an insufficient turning radius to safely accommodate a continuous fleet of heavy refrigerated 18-wheelers. Furthermore, the eastern edge of the development was situated squarely within a localized, high-risk floodplain. In the event of a severe weather crisis, the exact type of crisis my company was built to navigate, the facility would be completely underwater and cut off from the main interstate. Finally, the developers were currently locked in a bitter, unresolved legal dispute with the local labor union over unsafe construction practices. It was a logistical nightmare wrapped in a very expensive, shiny ribbon. My father was not just lying about our relationship, he was actively trying to sell a massive public safety hazard to a medical consortium. Armed with this indisputable data, I made my real move. I completely bypassed the flashy, overpriced real estate markets of Belle Meade and looked directly into the industrial heart of South Memphis, working under a strict non-disclosure agreement. Pulse Route Systems successfully secured the exclusive purchasing rights to the Fraser Freight Terminal. It was a massive, abandoned rail and truck dock sitting on 40 acres of prime, highly accessible industrial land. It lacked the glamorous zip code of my brother's project, but it possessed exactly what we needed: direct, heavy-duty access to 3 major interstates, reinforced concrete foundations, and absolutely zero risk of localized flooding. We were not just going to build a warehouse. I finalized the architectural plans to construct a massive, state-of-the-art emergency command campus, and because I refused to ever replicate the toxic, exploitative corporate structure my family worshipped, I legally restructured the new facility's ownership model. A significant percentage of the equity for the new center would be placed directly into an employee stock ownership program. The people who actually loaded the trucks, managed the inventory, and dispatched the emergency routes would own a tangible piece of the very ground they stood on. In addition to the operational floor, the new Fraser campus would house a dedicated training academy for emergency logistics dispatchers. I wanted to build a permanent pipeline for talented, hard-working people who lacked expensive university degrees but possessed the raw grit and intelligence to manage complex crises. Sitting in my quiet office late that evening, I reviewed the final incorporation documents for the Academy's primary educational grant. The legal team needed an official title for the fund. I did not have to think about it for more than a single second. I picked up my pen and wrote the name clearly on the top line: the Eleanor Hayes Fellowship. I named it to honor the only person in my family who had ever looked at my ambition and seen something worth building. My grandmother had handed me a $20,000 check when I was completely unknown, telling me to build what people actually needed. She had placed her unwavering faith in my hands long before a prestigious magazine cover told the rest of the world that my name had any value. Warren thought he was playing a brilliant, high-stakes game of public relations chess. He thought he could manipulate the press, leverage my silence, and successfully force me into saving his ruined reputation. He genuinely believed he had me cornered. He had absolutely no idea that while he was busy painting a beautiful, fake picture of our grand reconciliation, I had already dismantled his entire board, purchased a superior fortress, and permanently sealed his fate. All that was left to do was wait for him to proudly walk onto the stage and present his magnificent lie to the entire world. The grand ballroom of the Nashville Civic Center was completely suffocated by the blinding glare of media camera flashes and the loud, overlapping chatter of local and national journalists. The Mid-South Emergency Procurement Consortium had called this joint press conference to officially announce the location of the new regional medical response hub. Every major news outlet in the state had packed into the room, entirely convinced they were about to witness the ultimate corporate fairy tale. The narrative had been perfectly seeded by my father's expensive public relations team. The press was eagerly waiting for the prodigal, wildly successful daughter to publicly embrace her prominent family and save their massive real estate legacy. I stood quietly in the wings just off the main stage, wearing the same uncompromising charcoal suit I had bought in Memphis. Through the heavy velvet curtains, I could see my family occupying the absolute center of the front row. Warren Hayes looked incredibly in his element. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his face fixed in a deeply practiced, benevolent smile as he casually shook hands with city council members and wealthy investors. Grayson sat right beside him, proudly displaying a massive, glowing architectural model of the Cumberland Crown development on a table draped in black silk. My mother, Celeste, sat perfectly straight, beaming at the cameras as if she had personally engineered my entire career. They looked entirely ready to step onto the stage and accept their unearned glory. When the consortium director finally called my name, the room erupted into a frenzy of applause. I walked out from behind the curtain and stepped up to the wooden podium. I did not look at my family. I looked directly out at the sea of flashing lenses and expectant faces. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and echoing clearly through the massive speaker system. The entire room leaned forward, waiting for the heartfelt family dedication they had been promised. I adjusted the microphone and completely shattered their expectations. I want to begin this morning not by talking about corporate synergy or real estate, but by thanking the specific people who actually built the foundation we are standing on today, I said smoothly. I want to thank the night shift dispatchers who stare at routing screens until their eyes burn. I want to thank the long-haul truck drivers who navigate treacherous, icy highways in the absolute dead of winter. I want to thank the former trauma nurses who manage our warehouse inventory, the people who ensure that a rural hospital never faces an empty supply shelf at 3 o'clock in the morning. Those are the people who built Pulse Route Systems. They are the only names that truly matter. A slight, confused murmur rippled through the rows of seated journalists. In the front row, Warren's practiced smile faltered by a fraction of an inch. Over the past several days, I continued, projecting my voice over the growing whispers, there has been a massive, highly coordinated campaign in the financial press regarding the location of this new emergency hub. Many prominent voices have loudly suggested that my company will be anchoring a luxury commercial development right here in Nashville. I reached inside my suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legally certified dossier. I placed it flat on the podium, resting my hand firmly on top of the heavy paper. I am standing here today to permanently end that speculation, I stated, locking my eyes directly onto my father. Pulse Route Systems has never engaged in any formal negotiations, nor have we ever made a single verbal or written commitment to place our new facility inside the Cumberland Crown project. Furthermore, the promotional pitch decks currently being circulated by the developers of that project, which utilize my registered corporate image and imply a strategic partnership, are entirely unauthorized and legally fraudulent. The ballroom instantly descended into absolute, stunned chaos. Camera shutters fired in a deafening wave. Reporters frantically shouted questions over each other. Grayson visibly recoiled in his chair, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. Warren sat completely frozen, his eyes wide with genuine terror as the sophisticated, powerful illusion he had spent his entire life maintaining was violently ripped away in front of the very peers he desperately wanted to impress. Even if we had considered that location, I pressed on, my tone cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. It would be functionally impossible. The Municipal Planning Committee officially confirmed this morning that the Cumberland Crown property drastically fails to meet the strict structural criteria required for high-speed emergency logistics. The highway egress points are dangerously narrow, and the eastern sector sits directly inside a severe flood zone. We are in the business of saving lives during catastrophic crises. We do not build our fortresses on sinking ground. There was absolutely no elegant corporate jargon left in the world that could possibly repair the damage I had just inflicted. Warren Hayes had been publicly exposed not just as a manipulative father, but as a deeply reckless, dishonest businessman attempting to sell a dangerous liability to the medical community. I waited for the noise to drop to a manageable level before delivering the final, absolute strike. However, we do have an official announcement regarding the new hub, I said. Pulse Route Systems has finalized the purchase of the Fraser Freight Terminal in South Memphis. It will become our new operational heart and create hundreds of jobs. It will also include an employee ownership program, because the people who move this freight deserve a stake in what they build. I paused, allowing the massive scale of the new venture to settle heavily into the room. Finally, this campus will house a training academy for crisis logistics, I announced. Its primary educational fund will be called the Eleanor Hayes Fellowship, in honor of the first person who believed in this work before anyone else did. as the journalists scrambled to record the massive news. A tall, imposing figure stood up from the front row of the VIP section. It was Mitchell Voss. He did not ask for a microphone. He simply turned to face the entire room, his deep voice easily commanding the space. "On behalf of the Voss Care Medical Network," Voss declared, glaring coldly at Warren before looking back up at me. "We are incredibly proud to publicly throw our complete, unconditional financial support behind the new Fraser facility. We trust Pulse Route Systems implicitly with the lives of our patients. We look forward to a very long, highly transparent partnership." That was the absolute end of it. The golden ticket was formally, publicly awarded to me, completely obliterating any lingering, desperate hope my father had of using my shadow to salvage his ruined project. The press conference was officially adjourned. The journalists rushed the stage, shouting for exclusive quotes, but the security team quickly formed a tight barricade around the podium. Before I stepped away from the microphones, I looked down at the front row one last time. Warren, Celeste, and Grayson were still sitting there, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their public defeat. They looked small, entirely stripped of the unearned arrogance that had always defined them. I leaned down slightly, speaking quietly, but ensuring my voice carried directly to them. Love that absolutely refuses to coexist with basic respect, genuine curiosity, and fundamental belief is not a safe harbor. I told my parents, delivering the hardest truth of my entire life. It is just a very polite, highly destructive form of possession. You only wanted me when you realized you could wear my success. I am leaving the door open for a private, honest conversation if you ever decide you want to know the person I actually am. But all illusions regarding this company, and your access to it through the Hayes name, are permanently finished. I did not wait to see if they cried. I did not wait to hear whatever hollow excuses they might attempt to formulate. I simply turned my back on the blinding camera lights, walked confidently down the side steps of the stage, and headed straight toward the back exit. Waiting for me by the heavy metal doors were Marisol and Theo, smiling with fierce, quiet pride. They were the people who had slept on freezing concrete floors beside me. They were the ones who had fought through the absolute darkest nights to keep the world breathing. I walked away from the superficial noise of Nashville and stepped entirely into the brilliant, undeniable reality I had built alongside the only team that truly mattered. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.